Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a scope from Primary Arms. This is their new classic 1:6 LPVO. Now, full disclosure on this optic, this was sent out to us by Primary Arms. I have done a lot of work personally with Primary Arms, and they also send stuff out to the channel for review. On top of that, I'm also a dealer for Primary Arms, so there is a relationship there. However, we're still going to give this optic a fair shake. Now, getting into specifics on the Primary Arms Classic 1:6 LPVO, if you're familiar with their 1:4x, this is going to be very similar to that, but of course with a 1:6x magnification. Now, starting out with the external features of the optic, it is of course a 30mm main tube, 6063 aluminum body, which is very good. In terms of size and weight, we have an optic that is about 10.5 inches long and comes in at just over 17 ounces, 17.2 ounces, I want to say, without a mount, of course, which is pretty decent in terms of size and weight, especially for a 1:6 LPVO, though it is a very simple design, being that it is part of Primary Arms Classic series. Now, if you don't know, Primary Arms Classic series is actually below their SLX. So, of course, they have their SLX, which is their silver line, GLX is their gold, and PLX is their platinum. Classic slots below all of those is kind of their super budget, super basic options. Now, on the Classic 1:6, we of course have capped windage and elevation. They are in half MOA increments. Overall, the clicks actually feel really good. They're a little mushy, but they are tactile and audible, which is nice. And of course, being that they're capped, you're going to basically set and forget. Now, even though this is part of Primary Arms' quote-unquote super budget line, it does still have some nice features. You do, of course, have an illuminated reticle. The reticle itself is not much to speak of, though we'll get into that a little bit later on. It does come with an integrated throw lever, which is very nice. So it has a screw-in throw lever that is removable if you don't want it. And then it actually has a little internal detent that you can screw in place to really lock it down to make sure that it doesn't come loose. Very nice system, and it is, again, included. Now, the magnification lever itself, or the magnification throw, is 180 degrees from 1:6. It's fairly smooth. It's fairly light. This one here does have a little bit of grit in it, though that's because we dropped the optic, which we'll get into a little bit later on. And last thing to talk about on the scope itself is going to be the rear diopter, which is for adjusting the reticle focus to your eyes. Everybody's eyes are a little bit different, so you want to make sure that that reticle looks as clean and crisp as it can to you. I have really good vision, especially in my right eye, so usually I leave most diopters all the way in, though that even varies from scope to scope. And again, that is for adjusting that reticle to make it look as crisp and clear for you as it can. Now, getting into the reticle, this is a duplex reticle. So basically it has 4 lines heading to the center, and then it kind of has a floating 2 MOA dot. Now, the reticle is incredibly simple. A 2 MOA dot is going to be ubiquitous to every red dot on the market. Basically, it's something that most people are going to be used to. It is a good blend of speed and precision. However, with a 1:6x LPVO that could in theory be used out to 400, 500, 600, 700 yards, a duplex or a dot reticle in this case is just too simplistic to really take advantage of all that magnification. Beyond 300-400 yards, you're basically just holding off in no man's land. Now, I have made 400-yard and 500-yard shots with duplex reticle. However, that takes a good bit of trial and error and luck versus having a BDC, mil grid, hash MOA lines, anything like that to give you a reference point to go off of. With a duplex reticle, you can basically use a dead hold depending on your zero between 0 and 300 yards, and you do have 6x magnification. So if you want to be a little bit more precise within that 300 yards, you can definitely do that with 6x top end magnification. However, again, as soon as you go beyond that 300 yards, your drops are going to be Kentucky windage, and you're going to be holding off in no man's land. So the reticle, while very simple and effective up close, it leaves a lot to be desired as soon as you step outside of that close range envelope. Now, before we get into competitive options and what kind of kills this LPVO for me specifically, we will go over the rest of the features. So in terms of the usability of the scope, your eye box, eye relief, field of view, that sort of stuff, your eye relief on 1X is very good. Anywhere from about 2 to 7 inches, you get a very forgiving eye relief and eye box. At 6x magnification, you really have about 3.5, and you can back off a little bit forward and back, up, down, left, and right. Your eye box is very tight at 6x. Now at 1x magnification, the eye box itself, your up, down, left, and right, is very forgiving, so it is easy to use in odd positions. Now this is an illuminated reticle. However, at 11, because you do have 11 brightness settings, that dot is pitifully dim. Pitifully dim. It is barely what I would call an indoor bright optic, let alone an outdoors daylight bright optic. And unfortunately, their 1 to 4x, which we'll talk about in just a second, was actually a little bit brighter and better in terms of the illumination. Now, field of view on the optic at 1x is rated at 113 feet, which I consider to be very good. Anything above 100 is good. Anything above 110, very good. And then 120 plus is in that top tier phenomenal range. Now, 113 feet that they rate it at, for some reason, to me, it doesn't look like it has as big of a field of view to other LPVOs. Maybe it's just something with the internal geometries or the 1x image itself. The 1x image is decent. Now, this is a very lightweight, very simplistic scope, and it does tend to look good. So if you're, in terms of the raw glass quality, while it's nothing special and it's going to compete with basically every other Chinese LPVO on the market, it does look good. The light transmission is fine. The clarity is fine. Edge to edge looks decent. The 1X is reasonably flat. It's not going to be as good as a red dot or anything like that, or even nicer LPVOs, but it is, again, decent, and combined with the good eye relief and eye box at 1x, it is a very forgiving optic to use up close, very fast, very intuitive, that sort of stuff. Now, where the optic really starts to fall off is in that value proposition. Now, this optic currently is going for $200 at Primary Arms, which is about $100-ish cheaper than their SLX line, depending on sales and whatnot, so on and so forth. However, it is twice as expensive, actually more than twice as expensive currently, as their 1 to 4x model that has basically the exact same feature set. And remember, a 1 to 4x with a duplex reticle kind of makes a lot more sense because you only have 4x top-end magnification, so maybe you're only going up to 300 yards, maybe 400 yards at max. With the extra 6x magnification, or the extra 2x, of course, at the top end, you're spending more than double the money. Again, at current prices, those are always subject to change. You're spending more than double the money and getting almost no more performance because, again, a 4x inside of 300 yards is basically equally as usable as a 6x inside of 300 yards. Maybe in certain circumstances, you might just need just that little bit more magnification to give you just that little bit more precision, refining your point of aim, so on and so forth. But for the most part, their own 1 to 4x is going to blow this out of the water in terms of value. And if you're looking for a really good budget 1 to 6 LPVO, they have a lot of really good budget 1 to 6 LPVOs in their SLX line, which this is probably a little bit too close to. If this was $150 and their 1 to 4x was $120, well, now there's only a $30 price difference between them, and now it's kind of like, well, you get a little bit of extra magnification for not that much more money, but at more than double the cost currently, that makes it a really, really hard value proposition. And unfortunately for the 1 to 6 Classic, we're not quite done with it yet, because we do, of course, do durability / drop testing on the optic. Now, in terms of recoil withstanding abilities, I am sure it is perfectly fine. We only put a couple hundred rounds through it as of this point, but we did not experience any sort of point of impact shift from our point of aim. We zeroed it, set it, and forgot it. Now, when we get to our durability or our drop testing, usually we do 2 shoulder height drops, 1 onto dirt and rocks, and 1 onto an AR500 steel plate. Now, before the drops, we of course do a 5-round control group at 50 yards to get a control of where the gun is actually shooting with that specific ammo on that specific day. And then we perform a shoulder height drop, the first drop onto dirt and rocks. Now, after the first drop was achieved, we did another 5-round group to check for point of impact shift. And at 50 yards, it shifted to the right approximately 4.5 inches, which is about an 8 MOA shift to the right. Now, that is a very aggressive shift, and everything was torqued down appropriately. I do 25 inch-pounds on the rings on this Warn 193, and then 65 inch-pounds on the actual crossbolts themselves. So as far as the mount goes, everything was secured very well. Now, 8 MOA shift, It's a lot, and it's certainly not what you would want to see, and would, for me personally, knock it out of being any sort of serious role. And again, it is a very inexpensive scope, but they do claim that it's, going to still be durable and tough. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's bad, so on and so forth, and that's within their own marketing terms. Now, even with that 8 MOA shift after a shoulder height drop onto dirt and rocks, usually we would still follow that up with a shoulder height drop onto an AR500 steel plate. However, during the first drop, it also managed to basically unalive itself as the parallax shifted from 100 yards-ish, I believe is what it's rated at, to like 500 yards. So the target at 50 yards became very, very blurry and very difficult to tell where that reticle actually was, because again, at 1x, everything looks fine, but then as you go all the way up to 6x, something internally shifted, focus, internal parallax, whatever it happened to be, to make the target almost indistinguishable at 50 yards. Now, at extended distances, it still looks good, but anything closer than like 100 yards is very difficult to tell where you're actually aiming, because again, something internally busted on the optic during the first shoulder height drop, so a second drop really wasn't necessary, and on top of that, we did notice an 8 MOA point of impact shift. So, in terms of value, especially when you compare it to Primary Arm's own optic lines, the SLX line being only, $100 more expensive for way better features, reticles, performance, so on and so forth, and this being twice as expensive as the lower end 1 to 4x model, which makes more sense personally when you're only using a duplex reticle, it doesn't make a lot of sense within Primary Arm's own optic lineup, and it certainly won't make a lot of sense when you start comparing it to other kind of super budget optics in the, $200-ish price category, because then you're going to get into some other really good competition. Like, you can find some Vortex Strike Eagles, which are going to have better performance, better illumination, way better reticles. You can find those sometimes for the low $200 range, and that's going to be very close to what you're getting here, when this is going to have basically none of those features. So again, from a value proposition, it's not very good. From a just straight up performance aspect, it's also decent in terms of its up close usability. Again, it is a very usable optic. It's quick up close. As soon as you get outside of that 100, 200, 300 yard range where it's really going to do well, it's going to fall off a cliff, where other LPVOs with better reticles are going to maintain a certain level of performance out to those extended ranges. And again, with this, when it comes to durability, all of my drops are anecdotal to this specific gun, on that specific rifle, on that specific day, so it's not necessarily going to translate to your optic on your gun with a different sharp impact, drop, what have you. But again, in terms of its durability, it doesn't seem like it's going to be all that great. And again, there are a lot of other optics on the channel that have passed that double drop test, or at least done better in the initial drop, suffered less damage, so on and so forth. So overall, for this optic, I think Primary Arm should probably drop the price from $200 to $150. I think at $150, it makes a more compelling case against the lower end 1 to 4 model. And again, then it's further differentiated from its own SLX lineup, which again has better features, options, so on and so forth. So as of right now, for $200, it is a very, very hard sell. But let me know what you guys think of the Primary Arms 1 to 6 classic LPVO in the comments down below. Let me know if there's any other sort of scopes that I should compare it against in the future. But with all that out of the way, guys, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think once again. And with all that out of the way, I will see you in the next one. Peace out.